It's so important that we have that representation behind and in front of the camera.
I always say representation matters. It's entirely important to see someone that looks like you to help give you inspiration to follow your dream.
We have the same rights to participate in this theater world like anyone else. We just need the accommodation.
We're ready for our close-up, and it's time that we are integrated and that we tell our own stories.
Today, we're talking about disability representation in film, TV, and on stage.
Deep conversations, real honest stories, and complex, relevant issues all examined through a disability lens. This is In Focus.
Hello, I'm April Hubbard. Joining me today through Zoom is Maysoon Zayid and Prince Amponsah. Maysoon Zayid is an actress, writer, comedian, and disability advocate who lives in New Jersey. Prince Amponsah is an actor in film, TV, and on stage. He became a double amputee after a fire in 2012 and lives in Toronto. Maysoon and Prince, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, April. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Hello, April.
Prince, you've said that while you were recovering from the fire, you couldn't imagine returning to acting because you didn't see that there was a place for you there. Why is it so important to see someone like us on stage and on screen?
Yeah, well, I always say representation matters. It's entirely important to see someone that looks like you to help give you inspiration to follow your dream. And I think about also when it comes to disabled actors, it's really lacking in representation in TV and all sorts of media. And so as a kid with a disability, I can imagine it would be difficult to imagine yourself in that place or in a position like that when you can't see that on the screen. And, you know, we're surrounded by it in everyday life. So for it to not be on screen, it always boggles my mind.
It really does. Maysoon, I once saw an interview where you said that your disability has been the biggest hindrance in your career. Do you still feel that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I chose the route of stand-up comedy as my way into Hollywood because it's much easier being disabled as a comic, getting in and breaking through than it is as an actor. Hollywood shuns disability. They exploit disability stories. They choose which stories we're able to tell. You know, I really believe in the idea of casting disabled actors in roles that weren't written as disabled. When I finally got cast on General Hospital, the character that I play, who is a lawyer, we have never discussed her disability. She just happens to have CP because I do, and there's no way getting around that. And I want to see more of that. The reason that I think representation matters is, first of all, we make stories more interesting. The real life experiences and like the diversity of having disability characters that show that we're not a monolith, that intersects with every other race, age, economic class. We bring so much to the stories. We add so much flavor. The talent exists. We're not asking for charity. We're ready for our close-up, and it's time that we are integrated and that we tell our own stories.
Yes, there are so many talented disabled actors waiting to have a voice.
For me, I just recently was on a project on HBO Max called Station 11. In that role, it was also nice to not have disability be the thing that defined the character, right? Because, you know, you come as a person first and then you deal with your disabilities also secondary. But, you know, the disability doesn't define the person. So it's always nice to have that. It's really refreshing.
Maysoon, you've talked about the absurdity of not being cast as a girl with cerebral palsy when you were in college. What did it feel like to be told that you couldn't play yourself?
That was like the awakening to, ooh, this is going to be a lot harder than I thought it would be. And 20 years later in my career, I'm still interacting with like 28 to 34-year-old cisgendered, able-bodied white people who are gatekeepers, who I, as a disabled person, have to sit there and educate them on like the basics of disability 101 instead of just like pitching my project and being creative and being taken for my talents. I have to sit there and be like, well, it's a neurological disorder. And well, there's no shame in wheelchair use, that you can be ambulatory and use a wheelchair. I think they know how to not be offensive to your face when it comes to race and gender. And when it comes to disability, I was pitching a show and I had a network say, we love Maysoon and we love the show, but we already have a Down syndrome pageant show and they're just too similar.
Because we can only have one.
There was literally no similarity, not age-wise, not content, not format, but it's like, there can only be one disabled person. There can be one Black friend. There can be one woman on every comedy show.
We deserve so much better. Recent studies have shown an increase in disability representation on screen, but many of these disabled characters are still being played by able-bodied actors. I'm going to ask the controversial question, is it ever okay for an able-bodied actor to play a disabled character? I'll go to Maysoon first.
Because you saw I almost jumped out of my seat. It's not a controversial question. It's never, ever okay for a non-disabled actor to play visibly disabled on screen. I say visible because invisible is a separate category. It's a whole conversation, but visible disability, much like race, can't be played. So what I say to people is what they think are great portrayals by non-disabled people of disability are actually inauthentic, cartoonish, and harmful. Two, like as an actor, why do you want to spend like 3/4 of your acting brain trying to imitate how my lip shakes, making everybody uncomfortable because anyone like attempting to imitate my Gumby mouth would look like they were mocking me. The joke that I say on stage is, if a wheelchair user can't play Beyonce, then Beyonce can't play a wheelchair user and she can slay anything, just not that. And when people say to me, well, it's acting, I always say Denzel Washington is one of the greatest actors who ever existed, and he is not playing Hillary Clinton in a biopic. So it's not just acting.
I totally 100% agree with you. But I mean, it is lovely Oscar bait to be able to play that disabled actor, right? It seems like everyone who did it at some point got an Oscar. It was like a guaranteed thing. And it wouldn't matter so much if there wasn't such a lack of representation, right? We wouldn't be having these questions if we were able to have just as many people that are disabled on the screen. But unfortunately, you know, these roles are being taken away from folks like us, and that's what's so detrimental. I'm sure people are a lot more hesitant now, actors are a lot more hesitant now to take on those type of roles because we've just had enough of this, right? And it's because we're voicing our opinions and voicing our frustration about this, which is great.
And just to mention some statistics, in 2021, the most recent GLAD study showed that just over 3% of series regulars are characters with disabilities, but they're still being played by able-bodied actors more than 95% of the time. So we still have a long way to go.
Terrible. That's terrible. But we are shaming them. Prince is right. We're shutting down movies before they even open. The Backlash at Me Before You and, you know, the movie with Kevin Hart and Bryan Cranston, we're shutting movies down. So even though Hollywood is very slow on the uptake, they're starting to really be effective movements in the disability community where we shut you down on your opening weekend and you never recover.
So what can we as disabled performers do to reach the point where we're able to speak for ourselves and to have our voice heard?
Yeah, it's all about advocacy, right? It's all about being able to stand up for ourselves, but also feeling like we have a voice in the room. So it's always important for me to feel like I can speak for my rights and for whatever I need, and to feel that we can speak up, you know, to have that comfort and that safety is what's very important and vital.
I just want to also comment on something Prince said. If you are a disabled person who does have opportunity, insist on having other disabled people around you. So like, for example, I'm doing a docuseries right now that I'm hosting. And I was like, oh, I'm hosting a docuseries. Okay, I want to have 3 other disabled women of diverse disabilities and ethnicities surrounding me so that we're like the View after a really bad accident. And I could do that because I was the host, I was the power, I was the executive producer. When I sign contracts, I insist that 20% of crew is always disabled. My writer's room is 100% disabled people because I have the ability to make those decisions. Adam Sandler told me the greatest thing, that's my like big piece of advice for disabled actors and performers and creatives. Stop worrying about being high maintenance. A lot of times we think if we ask for accommodations, we're high maintenance. And I remember saying to Adam that I was afraid of being high maintenance. And he said, Mariah Carey's in that trailer. And so like your average Joe in Hollywood is a lot more high maintenance than any disabled actor that's like, hey, I need a quiet room or a ramp or a second translator.
I'm glad you brought that high maintenance thing up, because when I first got back into acting after my accident, I was always so afraid to say any accommodations that I needed, in fear of losing the gig or thinking, oh, you know, he's too much trouble or too much money or not worth it to deal with all this. And it was only over time, you know, over the years that I've been able to get to a position of comfort and to say, you know, this is what I need to be able to get this job done. And they're always open to it, right? When you bring it up. But there's such a fear to bring it up in the room, you know, because as an actor, you just want to be able to get the job and don't want to do anything to screw it up. But as a disabled actor, yeah, like you say, it's very important to speak up.
I had so much fun speaking with you both, but I think we're out of time. Maysoon, Prince, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, April. It's been such a pleasure having these deep and very important conversations. Thank you.
Coming up, partially sighted, deaf, and hearing artists create a unique theater experience.
Everybody is extremely positive and happy and excited about this experiment.
In Focus will be right back. You're watching In Focus.
Our next story is about an innovative theater collaboration in Halifax.
So what we're going to do is start from the top of the show and work through again.
Ben Stone, co-artistic director of Zupa Theatre, is rehearsing with a small group of deaf, partially sighted, and hearing performers for his latest production, At This Hour, set in the aftermath of the 1917 Halifax explosion.
So it's not a play, it's more of a documentary, a live documentary. And so the actors, the performers, are historians or documentarians, and they're explaining the legal process that happened after the explosion.
The explosion caused more people to lose their vision than any event in Canadian history and contributed to the founding of the CNIB. At This Hour was developed in partnership with the CNIB.
So the blind version of the show was created as a sound-based, audio-based performance. Sort of like a live podcast that has sort of surround sound aspects to it.
Philippa Coleman is a CNIB client and a co-creator, writer, and performer for the production.
It's been a challenge occasionally because in some ways theater is a very visual thing, so it's kind of been a learning experience for everybody involved. Like, they've been very good at accommodating and figuring out, like, how can we do this?
Hey, so the ship is coming towards you. It should pass you on your left. Same as cars. Keep to the right.
Another collaboration for the production is with The Signs of the Maritimes, a deaf theater troupe. Jim McDermott is one of the troupe's founders and a deaf performer in At This Hour. The voice you will hear is that of an ASL interpreter.
For us as deaf actors, using Maritime Sign Language, which is also known as MSL, is an essential part of this process. There may be people who've never seen certain signs that are MSL, especially those from Western Canada. It's important that we showcase those signs that are unique to the deaf community from the East Coast.
During the performance, deaf and hearing cast members are paired off and positioned side by side. Each pair performs their parts simultaneously.
Initially, I was quite nervous thinking about how we, the deaf actors, were going to work collaboratively with other actors who are not deaf, especially when we need to say our lines simultaneously. The hearing actors, when they saw a sign, were enamored with how expressive sign language is. They were inspired by what we were doing. We then realized the audience would also be impacted much more because of how expressive the deaf actors are when using sign language, with our facial expressions and movements. It was a great collaboration overall.
Nova Scotia, Canada.
It's been wonderful because we have this amazing consultant, Catherine McKenna, who's come and really gave us insight on how to work collaboratively together and to make things more visual and to create more awareness around the signs that are being used. It's been amazing.
Thurga Kanarasakulam Pillay, another deaf performer in the production, is from Toronto. Thurga spoke to us through an ASL interpreter.
We have, the same rights to participate in this theater world like anyone else. We just need the accommodation. If we don't get those accommodations, then it's not going to work.
In dress rehearsal at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic's small craft gallery where the play is being staged, Ben is looking forward to opening night.
Everybody is extremely positive and happy and excited about this experiment.
We must recommend that such competent authority.
Philippa hopes the audience gains a new perspective from the experience.
In terms of disability and in terms of advocacy, I think they can take away that something can be developed for different disabilities, and it doesn't have to feel like something that is tacked on.
And Jim hopes the audience takes away not only some new knowledge about the history of the explosion, but a fresh appreciation for deaf actors.
And I hope that, the audience, specifically the hearing audience, sees not only how we translate the script, but also how we translate the sounds that are a part of the performance. Because there is music involved in there, and it would be, I hope that they walk away having that visual impact of how we incorporated those sounds into our language and into our movements so that it makes it more accessible for all.
Coming up, a talent casting agency exclusively for people with disabilities.
There's this huge untapped pool of talent that is just not utilized, who deserve to be hired.
In Focus will be right back. Welcome back to In Focus.
Keely Cat-Wells is an entrepreneur and disability activist originally from London, England. An actor and dancer in her youth, she became disabled at the age of 17. After moving to Los Angeles and losing an acting job due to ableism, she founded C Talent, an award-winning talent management company in 2018. She joins me today from Los Angeles. Keely, welcome to In Focus.
Thank you so much for having me.
C Talent represents high-profile deaf and disabled artists, athletes, and influencers from around the world. What challenges do your clients face in getting hired?
There's still so many physical barriers to entry. I mean, our clients have frequently come back to us and said, we had a fantastic time on set. It was a really good job. Everything was great, except I didn't have an accessible trailer and I had to get my makeup done in the car park or had to get changed in a storage room. Or, these constant struggles of facing these accessibility barriers. And then the other thing I would say is the stigma and the stereotypes that we still constantly face. And I think that stems from the lack of inclusion of disabled people in behind the camera, in those roles behind the camera, in executive positions, in those creative positions, in the writers' rooms. So we've got a long way to go, but I would say those two are the biggest barriers right now.
Is that why C Talent provides disability consulting to productions?
We help with language and scripts and advise on casting and also on-set accessibility and locations going beyond compliance, trainings, audits, all of those kind of things to make the workplace a more accessible and favorable place for everyone, not just disabled people, but for everyone.
Why is it important to have disability representation both in front of and behind the camera?
It's so important that we have that representation behind and in front of the camera. It's taking that opportunity of disability inclusion and diversity with integrity. And there's so much talent. There's this huge untapped pool of talent that is just not utilized, who deserve to be hired, who should be hired, and can provide so much value to these companies.
What advice would you give to an emerging deaf or disabled artist starting a career in the entertainment industry?
Find your community and create content. I think, as we've seen with social media, if you are a director, a producer, a writer, an actor, you have everything you need with your iPhone and with your community and your friends to create content that can be seen. So I would certainly say that. And then the other thing I would say is just don't give up.
Thank you, Keely, for joining me today and sharing your vision behind Sea Talent.
Thank you so much for having me and for all that you are doing as well. Thank you.
When it comes to disability representation in film, TV, and on stage, it's true we still have a long way to go. But as our guests have shared today, change is happening. Thanks to their efforts and the efforts of many more creators and artists with disabilities, what we see on screen, on stage, and behind the scenes is the beginning of meaningful transformation. That's it for In Focus this week. If you'd like to weigh in or have an issue you'd like us to cover, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at feedback@ami.ca. Thanks for joining us.
Host April Hubbard, producer Wendy Purvis, videographer editor Andrew Pickup, reporter Jillian Gillis, narrator Grant Hardy, media accessibility specialist M. Williams, audio post Mark Phoenix, graphics Mike Smith, opening theme package composed by Matthew Monius for Matt Mac Music, senior producer Michelle Dudas, President and CEO David Arrington, copyright 2022 Accessible Media Incorporated.